Hello and welcome to another episode of The Distinguished Geek. So here we are. Marvel is over a decade old and is now embarking on a new era and preparing to tackle a brand new decade. This is 1950. The superhero sensation that engulfed the comics since the birth of Marvel and during World War II had dampened and all but disappeared. The costume crime fighters such as the Human Torch, the Captain America and the Submariner were heading into limbo, and the race was on to find the next big trend. Now during World War II there was a paper rationing, and Martin Goodman, the publisher of Timely Productions, had to be careful not to go over his allocated paper allowance, so he had to really maximise profit on every title that was printed. Now when the paper rationing was lifted at the beginning of 1950, Martin Goodman was determined to get Marvel on the dominant position of the sales racks. So it's all about selling the comic rather than the content. The strategy in 1950 was to find the successful trend, with it being westerns, romances, or even horror. The idea was to flood the market with the latest trend, pocket the profit, and move on to the next trend. Marvel would become the dominant presence throughout the 1950s. So in January, Genie comics transformed into cowgirl romances. Now this was an attempt to entice audiences from both genres, the western comics and romance comics, and combine them together for a whole new trend. Martin Goodman's experience as a publisher, which began in the early 1930s, knew that the title of a magazine was a big reason why readers bought the magazine in the first place. And for this reason, Marvel kept experimenting with its line of titles, renaming some titles even when the content remained practically the same, and replacing some other titles when a new trend was on the horizon. With this in mind, in June, cowboy romances became young men. And True Westerns became True Adventures issue number 3 in May. And then transformed into Men's Adventures issue number 4 in August. This concept allowed Marvel to move through the year, constantly allowing them to print a possible goldmine, and on the flip side, eliminating titles that didn't meet the criteria. This would remain Marvel's technique throughout most of the 1950s. In February, the final issue of Captain America comics, which was recently retitled Captain America Weird Tales issue number 75. This comic didn't have a single appearance of Captain America anywhere in the comic. However, this comic had 4 mystery horror stories. This was a short-lived attempt for Marvel to capitalize on horror comics, which was a growing genre, but a permanent farewell to a character that was Marvel's most popular superhero. But as we all know, the Cap will be back. So in May, a title roulette was at play. So Cindy Comics became Cindy Smith, which then became Crime Can't Win, 2 issues later in September, but with no change to the issue number. Strange, you say. So retitling a comic rather than cancelling it was common for 2 reasons. So basically, to secure a mailing permit for subscription copies, a publisher had to pay a fee for each title. But by continuing the issue number of a failed book with a new title, the publisher was able to avoid having to pay a fee a second time. Secondly, since the comic industry was a competitive industry, retailers were more likely to stock a comic with a higher issue number as it shows it had a successful track record, and more likely guaranteed to be seen and purchased, rather than a comic with a first issue cover. In December, Marvel's first costume character of the 1950s debuted with Marvel Boy issue number 1. This was Marvel's attempt to combine the superhero genre with the ever-growing trend of flying saucers. The origin story was that Professor Grayson was afraid that a world war was imminent and was about to destroy the planet, and so he built a rocket ship to fly himself and his son away from Earth. Arriving on Uranus, they were taken in by the native population. Through their knowledge, the boy, Robert Grayson, gained mental and physical perfection. Armed with a pair of wristbands that could project light bursts to blind his enemy, Robert returned to Earth as Marvel Boy and given the responsibility to protect Earth and Uranus from any threats from outer space. When Robert wasn't Marvel Boy, he worked as an insurance claims investigator. He patrolled the nation encountering threats from outer space, supernatural creatures and criminals on Earth. The fact that the series debuted with its own title and a first issue, unlike other comics from failed series, confidence was high on the success of Marvel Boy. The series actually didn't hit it off immediately. However, Marvel Boy would become an important part of Marvel's history, returning as a villain in Fantastic Four issue 164 in November 1975, bringing the existence of the comic character Quasar. Later reappearing amongst other transformed superheroes as a member of the Agents of Atlas more than 50 years after his debut. So last week's question was, what did Queen Juliana of the Netherlands grant in 1949? And the correct answer was she granted sovereignty to Indonesia. So well done to Laura for getting the correct answer. Right, this week's question is, what famous dog appeared in 1950? And for a bonus question, what was the dog's original name? Please leave the correct answer in the comment and I'll feature your name in next week's episode. As always, please leave a comment and let me know how you felt the video was. And once again, please like, share and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Have a great week, guys, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.
The